Hi, welcome to Right to Top. I'm Adam. In today's video, I want to talk to you about punctuation. More specifically, we're going to look at the semicolon, the dot and the comma underneath it, and the colon, the two dots. Both can be used to join sentences or to break up sentences. Both can be used or have functions with lists, when we're going to list a few things to explain something. You'll understand when we look at the examples. So let's dive right in and look at the function and the use of each of these punctuation marks, okay? We're going to start with the semicolon. First thing you need to know about the semicolon is that it shows a relationship between two sentences, two complete sentences, or think a bit more clearly, two independent clauses that each can stand on its own with its own message, its own meaning, but there is a very clear relationship between the two. Following the semicolon, you never begin with a capital unless you're using a proper noun, like a name of something. Then you're going to use a capital like normal. Otherwise, no capital. The colon is a little bit different. It goes one way. You see the arrow going one way, whereas the semicolon, they work together. We're still talking about a relationship between two sentences or two things, but the second part after the colon is basically an extension of what was said in the first sentence. So before the colon, you must have a complete sentence and then use the colon. And then what comes after it basically explains or amplifies or defines what was meant in the first sentence before the colon. After the colon, you can use a capital or not a capital. It's more of a choice. Again, proper nouns, you're going to use a capital. If you're going to give a quotation of something someone said, like a full sentence quotation, then begin with a capital. We're going to see some examples. So let's start with the semicolon. Again, we're going to look at a few different functions and then we're going to look at them in relation to each other. The semicolon can work as a coordinating conjunction and but so. In other words, it is joining two independent clauses and eliminating the conjunction, the coordinating conjunction. It basically works as the conjunction. Keep in mind, it's very important that the relationship, what the conjunction would do, is still very clear if I take it out and put a semicolon. So here are three sentences. The governor's speech was a disaster, period. Complete idea, complete sentence. Many people considered it the beginning of the end for his campaign. Another complete independent sentence with a full meaning. Each sentence can stand by itself. Now, I could join the two sentences with and. The speech was a disaster and many people considered it. So basically all I'm doing is adding another point with and. But if I want to use a semicolon, I get rid of the and, I put the semicolon. The speech was a disaster, many people considered it. Now, in terms of speech, you will hear that the pause is a little bit shorter with a semicolon than it is with a comma or a period. Essentially, think of a semicolon as a combination of a period and a comma. I have a complete sentence, so I want the full stop in a complete sentence. I have a complete sentence joined with a conjunction to another complete sentence, or I have the same thing, but with the semicolon. Now, of these three, why would I choose the semicolon and not the period and not the comma and conjunction? The reason I would want to choose the semicolon is one, I want to emphasize this relationship, or two, I just want to add a little bit of sentence variety to my writing. If I have many short, simple sentences, eventually it sounds a little bit boring. It could be a little bit choppy. So what I do is I join sentences together. I make that little pause a little bit shorter, and that way it seems like a long sentence, but essentially it's still two independent clauses. Keep in mind that when you have a sentence like the last one with a semicolon, this whole thing is one sentence, okay? Just like the second one with the conjunction would be. Now, do not put the conjunction and the semicolon unless you're putting it in a list, and we're going to look at that in a moment as well, okay? So, before transitional or linking words, you can also use a semicolon. However, otherwise, in fact, for example, so you end your sentence, but the next sentence has a direct relationship. So, for example, if you're going to give an example of the point you just made, you don't need to separate it. You can continue with the semicolon before the for example. Again, you could put a period and start a new sentence, capital F, for example, or semicolon, small f, for example. Salespeople need to maintain minimal numbers of new contracts. Otherwise, they may lose their jobs. Again, period, capital O, otherwise, also okay. But why separate them when you can join them and have a nice, complex looking sentence instead, okay? The Commission's report found that up to 12% of the voters were ineligible to cast a ballot, period. However, independent investigators claimed that the number could be as high as 20%. Or, to cast a ballot, however, after the semicolon, notice no capital, it's a small one, independent investigators. Also notice that after whatever the transitional word or phrase is, I have a comma after it. So otherwise, comma, however, comma, to begin the next sentence, okay? Very important to remember that. So we're looking at a relationship, and we're looking for adverbial or transitional phrases or words. Now, in a list, sometimes you have a list of like 1, 2, 3 items, and that's no problem. 1, 2, and 3. But if your list includes clauses, and those clauses have commas in them, then you're going to have a lot of commas, and it could be a little bit confusing to the reader. So when you have complex items in a list, complex meaning that there's more than one clause, there could be phrases, then separate the items with a semicolon. Membership comes with benefits, colon, and I'm going to talk about those benefits, and I'll talk about that colon use in a second. Members can and are encouraged to make use of the club's extensive library. They may borrow club equipment and use available supplies at a nominal fee, and they may visit the club at their convenience as we are open 24/7. Now, technically, this is correct, but it could be a little bit confusing to a reader because there are so many commas going on. Sometimes it might not be clear where one item ends and the next item begins. In that case, separate the items with a semicolon. Members can and are encouraged to make use of the club's extensive library. They may borrow club equipment and use available supplies at a nominal fee. And they may visit the club at their convenience as we are open 24/7. I have the 3 items very clearly separated. And notice with the last item, even though I'm using a semicolon, I still use the and to introduce the last item. This is not a coordinating conjunction. I mean, it is kind of, but it's more of a coordinating list. So you're just listing 1, 2, and 3. You're not coordinating independent clauses, okay? So I hope that's pretty clear. Now, let's look at the colon. When do we use a colon? A colon is used to prepare the reader. This is very important to remember, to prepare the reader for an extension of the previous complete sentence. Before a colon, you must have a complete sentence, okay? Or it's used to introduce a list. So let's look at an extension, followed by a noun or a phrase. The media seems to have a favorite target. Now, the reader wants to know who that target is, right? It's an expectation. A colon prepares the reader to expect something. And then the writer must fulfill that expectation with an explanation. So the media seems to have a favorite target. What? Big business and secret government agencies. Notice that I don't follow the colon with a complete sentence. I don't have to. Noun, one word noun, fine. A phrase, also fine. You can also follow it with an independent clause. There can only be one explanation for this scandal. So the reader's saying, well, what is it? The mayor simply doesn't care. So both sentences stand together, stand independently. They can be sentences by themselves. But if you put the mayor simply doesn't care by itself, it's a bit of a weak sentence because I don't know what does this mean? Like, what is this in relation to? When I join it to the previous sentence with a colon, I understand it as a direct extension. There can only be one explanation, and that is that the mayor simply doesn't care. So the idea continues into the next independent clause. And you can also use colon with a quote. The leader had this to say. And now you're setting it up. Here's what he had to say. And then what did he say? In quotation marks. We are here to win, not to simply make our presence known. Now notice that when I use a direct quote and a full sentence quote, I begin it with a capital. Okay, not a small W, a capital W. Okay, let's go on and look at how to introduce a list with a colon. Please bring 2 passport photos, a completed application form, and 2 pieces of ID. This is a totally okay sentence. Now, I will not put a colon after bring. Please bring, colon. Not correct. Do not put a colon and start a list after a verb. Only use a colon after a complete sentence. Don't use it after a preposition either. If the preposition needs an object, put in the object, then colon, and then give me the list. So you can do it 2 ways. Please bring the following. So please bring the following. This is a complete sentence. And then you put the colon and then give me the list of items you need to bring. If you're doing a vertical list, same idea. Please bring the following, colon, and then you can put your lists in bullet points. You cannot say please bring, colon, and then your vertical list. It's the same as the above one. After the verb, do not put a colon. Complete verb, complete sentence, okay? Some more examples. The dish calls for several key ingredients, colon. What are they? A, B, and C. The dish calls for several key ingredients. For example, A, B, and C. Okay, there's a semicolon if you wanted to use it that way. You're not going to use a colon because you have your transitional phrase to begin the next clause, full clause. The dish calls for several key ingredients, including A, B, and C. Do not put after including a colon because it's not a complete sentence anymore. The dish calls for several key ingredients. Including needs an object, so that's already part of the list, not part of the clause that came before it. And I've seen people do that many times. After including, they put the colon. Not correct. Now, let's look at some situations where you can use either the colon or the semicolon, but I'll tell you what you should or shouldn't do there as well. The governor's speech was a disaster. It was full of inaccuracies. No one laughed at the jokes, and the media teared it to shreds. So here, I'm giving you a list of reasons why the governor's speech was a disaster. There's a direct relationship. It's not really and or but or so, but you don't always have to have a coordinating conjunction. You can use a semicolon just to merely show a relationship. But look at the second sentence. The governor's speech was a disaster, colon. It was full of inaccuracies. No one laughed at the jokes. The media teared it to shreds. So here I have 3 complete sentences, each one by itself, period, period, period. I'm not giving you a list. Now, why would I use the first one or the second one, or not vice versa, right? First of all, notice with the colon, I'm using capitals. I have 3 separate sentences. Each begins with a capital. The semicolon, it's more of a list, and it doesn't begin with a capital. It begins with a small I for it. Why would I use one or the other? Emphasis. That's really all it is. The colon is a little bit stronger. The semicolon shows you that there's a direct relationship and you want to keep it in mind that they go together. And technically, it was full of inaccuracies. No one laughed. With a semicolon, this is a complete sentence by itself, even though it's kind of a list. Okay, it's a list of independent clauses. Now, which one should you use in your writing? Personally, I recommend avoid the colon for this kind of sentence. Use the colon to introduce a list. Use a colon when you're about to very clearly extend the previous sentence, when you're about to define it or clear it up, clarify it, or amplify it. If you're going to use this, better not to. You might make mistakes. Now, keep in mind that native English speakers also have a very difficult time with semicolons and colons. If you're not 100% sure that you're using either of these punctuation marks correctly, don't use it. Put a period, put a comma, and, but, whatever. If you're not sure, avoid it, okay? Better to have a few short, simple sentences than make the bad connection and the whole sentence falls apart anyway, right? Let's look at the last example. The concert was canceled. Why? Not enough tickets were sold. The concert was canceled. Not enough tickets were sold. Same meaning. Why? Because not enough tickets were sold. The relationship doesn't have to be one of a coordinating conjunction. It just has to be a very clear relationship. But again, I would not use the comma. I would not use the colon. Sorry, I would use the semicolon, because the colon is very strong. All right, it creates a lot of expectation for the reader. Again, if you're not using it correctly, you can basically disturb the flow of the reading, which works against you. Use the semicolon to show the relationship. Use the semicolon to show the relationship. Use the colon to introduce a list or define something clearly. Now, I know that this stuff is not easy. Again, not easy for native English speakers when they're doing their writing. You avoid it or practice it a little bit. You'll see how it works. When you do reading in newspaper articles or online or wherever you do, pay attention when the writer uses semicolons and colons and figure out why he or she is using them, and then you'll pick it up yourself as well. Of course, if you have any questions about this, please ask me here below in YouTube. I'll be happy to help you out. And of course, don't forget to come back, watch more videos, grammar, vocab, test tips, writing, etc. If you like this video, please press like, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again real soon. Bye-bye.